Rob Rinder.
Clever.
Compassionate.
Questioning.
Consultative.
Convincing.
Convicted. Rob Rinder. Malud, Maloud, Malive. Rob Rinder at Drive on Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, this is Rob Rinder at Drive on Talk Radio with Skills for Life. Unlock your potential and learn the skills or get the qualifications you need to get the job you want. Search Skills for Life. And now it's our time to hop over the little pond that is the Atlantic to Professor JC, John Christopher Bua, White House correspondent at Real Political News. A lot to get through, Prof. JC. President Biden's State of the Union address this week. Did it do anything to improve his rather low approval ratings amongst voters?
Well, it immediately improved his approval ratings, and he did something unwittingly for that I'm sure Putin wasn't happy with. He unified both Democrats and Republicans against Putin, and he made it very clear that America is unified against this tyrant, and you had Democrats and Republicans joining them in applause on the floor of the House of Representatives during the State of the Union address on Tuesday night. And so that was a plus.
Right. And just to be clear, I mean, we remember the scenes of when Donald Trump did his State of the Union address and Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the House, ripped up the speech. This was pretty much the first time that we've seen cross-party unity on any issue in some time, Prof. JC, right?
Well, it's true. I mean, he has had a tough slog with a lot of his domestic programs that he's wanted to put through, although he did get two major pieces of legislation and did major work on vaccinations and so on. But, you know, he had to come out. He had to hit it out of the park. He did. And Putin is the less for it.
Mm-hmm. One of the discussions at the moment is whether or not there should be a no-fly zone over Ukraine or Western Ukraine to create a corridor of safety. Of course, the US leads NATO. What it says will be critically determinative of what NATO does. The concern, of course, is that Putin has said that will be a provocation leading to the Third World War. The question that we've been asking during the course of the program is, to some extent, doesn't Vladimir Putin want us to believe that he is that unstable and that crazy to press the nuclear button, and that NATO are capitulating to that degree of capriciousness rather than saying, you know what, enough is enough. We may not want to put boots on the ground, but we're at least going to protect the airspace over Ukraine.
Well, I think what Putin is doing now, and he's also done it with exploding the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, and the threat, which I call nuclear blackmail to NATO, saying if you, in fact, put a troop on the ground or shoot one of our MiGs down or whatever he's doing, or one of our missiles down, then that's going to mean the Third World War. Well, we don't have MAD anymore, which you remember.
Mutually assured
destruction concept. That's historical. But the Russians did away with that. There's no more problem with first use. And in fact, Putin will push the world. Now, what happens when people like Kim Jong-un and Xi have learned about this thing that Putin has gotten away with, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, we're gonna pull this nuclear blackmail on you too, because we have nukes and we'll use them too." It has to be dealt with. The no-fly zone has to be dealt with. And generals a lot more wise than I am are figuring out if there's a will, there's a way, and it has to come together to protect these people, which we're seeing so many tragic stories.
You know, Prof. JC, I think that's a really good way of putting it, and make sure people get that clip of you saying it. I think a lot of people feel like that because you're a nuclear-armed nation, that you can wage war crimes through belligerent war as a form of nuclear blackmail. If you deploy your troops if you deploy a no-fly zone as a way of protecting the women and children of Ukraine, we're going to send a nuke your way. If a state as rogue as Russia is able to do that, your point is, what does that mean for other states like North Korea is a very powerful one. What's the general consensus amongst the political leadership in America about that?
Well, I think that they would like to see some form of maybe a dome, some form of protection some form of taking away the power that Putin has, maybe internally or maybe through discussions. Zelensky has asked Putin to meet with him, and he won't. They gave up their nuclear weapons, Rob, because there was a Budapest agreement, a memorandum that said we'll give up our nukes if you don't attack us. Yeah. And we made it with Belarus, U.S. and Russia. We'll give up our nukes, but don't go down the road with us. Right. And they did, and now Zelensky's stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Prof. JC, one of the important issues here is the fact that although there have been very serious, in fact, pretty much the hardest sanctions placed on Russia, they are not yet, it seems, necessarily biting. And part of the reason for that is because of the international dependency on Russian oil and gas. And there are billions of dollars being handed over from your country, from mine, and especially from Europe every single day. In other words, we are funding our enemy to attack our friends. We had an expert in earlier from the Tony Blair Institute talking about ways that we could reduce our dependency on Russian oil and gas. Isn't it time that America and Western nations moved to a situation where we became much more dependent on our own capacity to build our own energy reserves rather than relying on a foe, on an enemy like Vladimir Putin?
I absolutely agree. And I believe this administration is looking towards alternative fuel. And I think that it's important that we understand we're in a global economy and that we sink or swim together. You know, it's amazing. I know you're like when I mention occasionally films. Yeah. And sometimes we have fun with that. But this is going to be a film that is very prescient, perhaps, even though it goes back to 1979. And you may remember a film called The China Syndrome. Yeah. It was about a nuclear accident. Yeah, it was an accident that was unreported. It was wonderful. Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas, and I'm looking at the, and of course Jack Lemmon. Yeah. And the China Syndrome, because the nuclear waste that they didn't report was going into the soil, and they were afraid it was going to come out in China. You know that famous phrase your mommy would say, "You're digging to China," right. And that was very prescient. And a week after that film came out, we had our own nuclear disaster in 3 Mile Harbor and 3 Mile Island, way before Chernobyl. And we have to be aware that this is really dangerous stuff. And as a world community, we must have a nuclear proliferation. We must be sensitive, and Vladimir Putin must not be the main thrust of fear and nuclear issues. After all, he is ruling us. He is keeping us blackmailed, and he is keeping us in fear. And they either deal with him at home, or somehow he will be dealt with by the international community. Well,
the being dealt with is an interesting one. I follow Russian news, as you know. Brave dissidents, brave protesters are now under threat of, they're being carried away, 10-year prison sentences. And there was a brave moment where the last independent news source closed themselves down, saying "Stop War," and played, as you'll know and will have seen, the last scene of Swan Lake. An incredibly moving moment. But, you know, Senator Lindsey Graham, who's flip-flopped over the past, I remember him writing the piece for Hillary Clinton in Time magazine when she was nominated as one of the influential people of the world, and then subsequently becoming a Trumpista. So, you know, he's had an interesting political journey, you might say. But one thing he got into trouble for in the last 24 hours was saying the best way to deal with this is for somebody in Russia to take Vladimir Putin out. I was interested by the blowback that he got across the American media for saying that. I mean, he's only saying what a lot of people are thinking, right?
Well, he did. And some people said he should be banned from Twitter for actually requesting that there should be a Brutus, in other words, an assassination of Putin. Now, my answer to that is, would there be an Anthony, and would there be a Mark Antony, and who would mourn Putin if in fact that happened? But the thing that really astounds me is there's a group in America called the Mitzvah Project, which working with senior citizens, old Jewish grannies and bubbies who are in Ukraine, and they're being told by Putin that they are Nazis, that Ukraine are Nazis, they're neo-Nazis. And these poor ladies, and you know what they did? They bombed Babi Yar, which is one of the most sacred places in all of Judaism, and it's a site in Ukraine, and they're trying to twist it. You know, the old story that Goebbels was always promoting in his propaganda as propaganda minister. You take the lie, you say it over and over again, and eventually they'll believe it. Also, take what you're doing to people and blame others for doing that themselves.
Prof. JC,
and it's not going to work.
Well, Prof. JC, you know, one of the issues, of course, is in the last 10 years or more, but certainly in the last 10 years, we've never had more or deeper endemic distrust of what people might loosely describe as mainstream media, with your president, for instance, your last president, certainly, but even again across both sides of the political aisle, suggesting that the other is deploying fake news. And one of the consequences of that is that people nowadays feel very conflicted and don't know where to find a reliable news source, which allows leaders like Vladimir Putin to exploit that, to claim fake news, and consequently for their wicked narrative to win out. You know, moving forward, do you think that the news services across America, cable news, have had to reflect, and are they changing?
Well, I must tell you, I've got a lot of friends in country because I'm a White House correspondent. Many of my colleagues are in Ukraine right now, and they're with a few different news services. And I would say in this country, we do have free and open journalism, and the reports, Rob, and even the State Department and the Defense Department are giving credit to some of these news organizations for showing such live, astounding reporting. Really, I think, pretty much fair. I mean, you're seeing apartment complexes and children being bombed by these hyperthermic bombs and by multi explosives that are designed for anti-personnel purposes to kill children and people. And the husbands stay home, the wives and children escape, and now they want to have these so-called safe corridors where they're going to get them out of the country. I think that is a prescription for disaster, because once you put people in a safe corridor, supposedly, that's a good way to find them and do away with them. I don't trust anything coming out of Russia.
Well, we certainly agree on that. As ever, clear, concise, helpful. Our little postcard from across the Atlantic. Prof. JC, you're listening to Rob Rinder here at the home of Common Sense on Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.